Good afternoon, everyone. So glad you could join us for Learn at Lunchtime today. Just go over a couple of things. I'm Sherry Trimble, museum educator. I'm kind of going to be in the background monitoring things, making sure everything's going well. I just put in the chat box some policy information, some links that might be helpful just throughout the program. Today, we are going to be using the question and answer button at the bottom. So if you have any questions during the program, make sure you use that option to share information with us. And so glad you can join us. And now I'm going to turn it over to museum educator Beth Erickson, who's going to help lead our program today.
Hello, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. I am Beth Erickson, museum educator at the State Museum of Pennsylvania, and this is Adventures in Nature Lab. With me today is Scott Bills. Scott enjoyed a career as a land manager and conservation officer with the Pennsylvania Game Commission for over 34 years. He is a naturalist with over 50 years of birding experience. Hello, Scott.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hi, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about your interest in birds and birding?
Well, it started when I was a young boy. My father was a hunter, and often, as many fathers were back then, and he got a pair of binoculars, which I found pretty fascinating. And actually, I got a bird book for Christmas one day. In fact, I found it today, Birds of the World. It's really just more birds of the United States, but I distinctly remember some of the images in there. And we had a cabin in the Poconos, so I would go up there and walk around with binoculars and look for birds. And I remember the day I found my first scarlet tanager, and that was pretty much it. I was hooked.
That's a beautiful bird. I know we have one of those represented in Mammal Hall at the State Museum.
Right. It's a gorgeous bird.
Yeah, it is. The temperatures really warmed up this week, and I think all of us have been waking up to the sound of birds singing and chirping, and with that warm weather, we're all anticipating spring. So many of us have been feeding birds throughout the winter, providing food for them, including seed and other products when food is scarce and not found on the ground or it's covered by snow. So there have been a lot of birds that we've seen around that we've been taking care of, but a lot of people stop feeding birds in the spring. So tell us why we need to keep feeding birds in the springtime.
Okay, and this weather does actually bring that to the forefront. Here at my feeders, I've noticed there's less birds, and you're going to find less birds at your feeders as the weather warms and all that. But for the most part, and the analogy I like to use is like your favorite grocery store where you do all your grocery shopping. Really, Mother Nature is a giant grocery store, and the shelves are stocked right around October. Got hard mass, soft mass fruits, berries, everything you can imaginable out there. But and then the mad rush for food all through the winter. The birds are eating all this stuff, and come spring, the cupboards are bare. And I implore people to keep feeding, because there's not a time during the year that in the month of March specifically into April where there's not that much out there for them. They really are scavenging.
So what natural foods would birds be able to find at this time?
There's, it's the last of the berries. If I look at some of my shrubbery and stuff, you'll see here you have a cedar waxwing in my winter berries, and those berries are pretty nice and plump. It's funny how as the robins and the cedar waxwings eat this stuff, you go out there and take a look at it. You look at crab apples, or you look at mountain ash or the winterberry. There's a few berries left. They're the lousy ones. They're split or whatever, and you can see that it's just the remnants, but they're still eating the same stuff, but they're having a harder time finding it.
So if we want to provide food for the birds, we go to the store. There are a lot of choices out there. So how do we decide what should we be feeding these birds?
Well, I want to take you through it. The single most easiest food to feed, and many times people just buy a mixed food, but if you're really going to help most birds, or a lot of the chickadees and the titmice and some of the woodpeckers and on, is just straight sunflower seed. Now this picture depicts some fine cracked corn on the left, some peanuts, black oil sunflower, and there are other southern flowers like striped sunflower, but black oil is, you get more seed per pound. And then there's white proso millet on the right. Sunflower in tube feeders like this, is the best way to handle it. I mean, you don't have to throw sunflower on the ground if you don't want to, but sunflower should be put in a dispenser like this. All the birds that eat sunflower seed are usually birds that are used to eating seed off of trees and limbs, and so they're comfortable perched on a feeder like this. There's purple finch and goldfinch here. Go ahead.
That's a great one. So we're looking at a few different types of feeders. So there's no real necessarily wrong way to feed if we're purchasing a feeder at a store. Is there a preference, or are there some birds that just prefer being on the ground?
Well, and that brings up the big thing. I mean, sunflower seed should be put somewhere up in the air on a dispenser or a table or something like that. When you get to the seed mixes, it changes. And I think the next slide, Cardinals, if people think about it, they've never seen a cardinal on one of their tube feeders. It just doesn't happen. Cardinals feed on the ground. Juncos feed on the ground. Sparrows feed on the ground. These birds are all actually in the finch family, but they have different preferences in how they live and what kind of food they eat. So what this really is, you might consider this a bird feeder. And it's what I call this is the feeder wheel. It's basically a piece of white pine cut. I just did nothing but elevate the ground to a point where I can see it better, and it keeps the food off the ground, so it keeps it a little drier and all that. And the Cardinals and the Juncos feel comfortable on this, but they will not go to a hanging tube feeder or that. So when you want to feed sparrows, well, you got to feed it on the ground, and Cardinals for that matter. Now this is a seed mix, and this is where things get kind of tricky. And this is one of the main points of this program is that if people go to the store, spend good money on bird food, they're misled by the manufacturers who put things on the bags like, oh, this is for towhees, red-bellied woodpeckers, and orioles or something like that, which is ludicrous because they don't even feed on the same things. But you need to pay attention to the labels. And the labels are just like food labels. Whatever the greater percentage of volume is made up of, that's the first ingredient listed. And so if you go to say your grocery store and just buy a cheap bag of bird mix and it says Milo, cracked corn, wheat hulls, oats, and that there's nothing there. That's nothing there that's really readily available to those birds that you're trying to feed. What you should be doing when you buy a bird mix, and actually I mix my own, but it should start with millet, because millet is what the sparrows want, white prosome millet. And then it can have sunflowers in it and maybe some safflower seed, some rapeseed, canary seed, all those kind of things. It's going to be more expensive, but you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck. And people like to take bird mix like this and put it in a feeder, like a tube feeder and all that. And I'll tell you what happens. The chickadee comes there, or the titmouse comes there, roots through it, knocks all the seed to the ground, waiting to get to a sunflower seed, pulls out the sunflower seed, flies off, hatches a seed, eats it, comes back and does the same thing. So the sparrows say, thank you very much. You knocked the food to the ground, but I'm saying start there. Don't put it in the feeder. Throw it on the ground where the sparrows are. They will feed on it. And it fools people all the time. Here I use a natural log feeder. They just love just standing on a log and eating this stuff. And they do leave the shells behind. I want people to realize that. I've heard people tell me that, well, they feed the stuff in the ground and nothing's eaten. It's still there. Well, if you look close, it's gone, but the shells are there. It's just like walking into a restaurant that lets you eat peanuts and throw the shells on the ground. It's the same way. And it looks pretty much like there's food all over, but they're eating it. Trust me.
That's great.
Yeah.
Tell us about this one.
Well, this is a fox sparrow, one of our largest sparrow that we usually get here in Pennsylvania. And this is a feeding station out one of the ends of my house, and it's feeding on the ground. These birds feed just like chickens. They stand there, scratch with both feet, and then pick and find out the seed they find, and then they move to another place and scratch. But you're not going to see this bird on a feeder. It's going to be on the ground all the time.
And I think you have another, this one with the cardinal. I remember seeing this. This is a beautiful picture. So this is another feeding station you have.
This is actually the fox sparrow that was in that last photo was right in front of that flat rock there. There's a stump right here, and it kind of holds a little cove there. Birds like to go in there for protection. Behind here, you'll notice some greenery. That's my Christmas tree from that season. So people, don't throw away your Christmas trees. Put them out for the garbage man, or rather drag them in next to your feeders for cover. And the birds will be more appreciative of it, and you get a lot more use out of that $40 Christmas tree you bought.
Yeah, I think you mentioned before that you told other people, hey, don't get rid of your tree. I'll take your tree and put it in your property.
Yeah, if I drive down the road and I see one out for the garbage man, I'll throw it in the back of my pickup truck and bring it home.
That's great.
Yeah, even the birds don't mind a little bit of tinsel once in a while, you know.
They might use it in a nest, right?
Well, they could, you know, they do use more and more man-made materials in nesting, but yeah, they would.
That's great.
All
right.
So this slide, this is Niger. Niger is probably my third most favorite food behind the mixes and the sunflower seed. And Niger is a specialty food. It's small seed. And everybody out there feeds probably has tried this once or another, but I'm just trying to make a point that there are special feeders for it. They sell it sometimes in seed socks, but in this case, you'll see there's very small holes on here, and these pine siskins are just happy to sit there and feed on that. And they are shelling that seed also. You'll find the pieces laying on the ground. And when things get crazy, and I have 50 or 80 goldfinches, and there's about 100 birds in this picture, actually, if you can count them.
That's great.
Siskins and goldfinches, there's too many of them, and all they do is squabble all day. I'll throw some of it on the snow or whatever and let them feed on the ground. And they will go to the ground, but they prefer feeding on hanging feeders. Why? Because they feed on birch seeds and birch catkins and things like that. And so if a bird eats out of a tree, it wants a feeder. If it eats off the ground, it wants the food on the ground. Simple as that.
Well, we've talked a lot about feeding finches and cardinals and other birds that we see. We view as they're songbirds. They're birds that we hear and are beautiful with color, but there's other unique birds like woodpeckers. Now, I've seen woodpeckers in my yard. Usually I see them on an old stump or a tree, but there's a way that we can provide food for woodpeckers as well, correct?
Right. And you hit it right on the nose when you said you see them on a stump or an old tree. So why expect a woodpecker to come to some hanging feeder or whatever? It's not going to do that. It's going to come to this, like this is a woodpecker feeder. Basically, it's a chunk of log I cut, put a screw eye in the top, drilled holes in it with a spade bit, and stuffed suet in it. The picture before that of the pileated woodpecker was a snag, and that I planted there. I call it planting a snag. Went down to my woods behind my house that I own, cut an old snag down that the pileated woodpeckers I've been working on, brought it up in my feeding station and planted it in the ground. And I mean, any old piece of wood will work. And so I have snags that look like they were, like I was in part of a forest with dead trees. I put all those there. And then you just put the suet in the holes, and they just feel natural and safe eating there. You know, that's what you got to do for a woodpecker.
That's terrific.
A lot of people feed suet cakes, and suet cakes are all right and all, but there's a lot more seed in there than suet. So these birds eat nothing but protein. And so if you can, suet is the best way to go, or beef fat, or even if you're cleaning out a chicken before you roast it, those 2 globs of fat out there near the vent, you know, where it's been cleaned out, you take them off. I take them outside and stuff them in one of the holes, and the birds feed on that. That's
amazing. Well, I've seen also people use peanuts. Peanuts seem to be a favorite of people who want to feed. So
peanuts are a nice feed. Yeah, they're nice and clean, and they're not cheap or anything. But I'm actually on my second 50-pound bag this year. But peanuts,
shelled or not shelled, which way should they be? Shelled. Okay.
Shelled. If they're in the shell, only blue jays or whatever will recognize them and carry them away. But yeah, you want shelled peanuts, and you know, besides the Carolina wrens and red-bellied woodpecker and nuthatches that love peanuts, titmice just love peanuts. At nighttime, you might even get a nice flying squirrel like this one that comes in nightly to my peanut feeders and eats their share also. You know?
That's great.
They're all welcome. It doesn't have to be a bird to be interesting or whatever. So
that's great. You're feeding everyone. Well, speaking of feeding, I hear you have a special recipe for bird dough. Would you be willing to share that?
Yeah, I would. My bird dough, and there are some on the market, but it's very simple. And here's a photo of bluebirds eating the bird dough. It's a formula 214. That's a weight formula. Basically, what I'm saying is I buy 2 pounds of lard, 1 pound of peanut butter, that's going to be like a 16.5 ounce jar. I think they put them in there for that reason. It's a pound of peanut butter, and 4 pounds of cornmeal. Or you can use 1 pound of lard, half a jar of peanut butter, and 1 2-pound bag of cornmeal, but it's 2-on-4 is the ratio. And you melt the lard, add the peanut butter. The peanut butter melts in with the hot lard. After the lard is melted, take it off the burner, add the cornmeal, stir it, pour it into the containers, let it cool. It's shelf stable. It's pliable. It reminds you of pretty much those of you the bakers out there that make peanut butter cookies, just like that. It's the same kind of pliability. And you take it out, roll it up in your hands, and stuff it into the woodpecker feeders that, and the birds just go crazy at. That's the only time I've ever seen juncos try and hang onto a log is to get at some of that stuff. Every bird recognizes it as something beneficial or good that they're trying to use, particularly in cold weather. So, yeah, that's my bird though.
That's great. Well, we've covered a lot of, we've talked a lot about food, and food's not the only thing that we need in a habitat in the backyard to take care of our birds. So another thing we would talk about would be a bird bath. So, and you have this amazing natural type of bird bath. Some of us have stands or other dishes to provide water. Can you tell us a little bit about the importance of water and birds?
It's actually very important, and in the whole list, in a desert situation would be number one. But it's probably during drought times, and we always get these droughts here in Pennsylvania now, in the summer. And I've noticed the birds are just flocking to this thing. Yeah, this is a little bit extreme. It's 2 ponds and it has a waterfall and all that, but it's not just for the birds. It's just for aesthetics for me and my family and all. But a bird bath with a dripper, a bird bath in the winter with a heating coil in it. When it gets really cold, like it was for a while there, when everything's frozen up, you can see the activity. The birds go crazy for any kind of melting water, and during drought, same thing. So clean water is very important. Birds like to stay pretty much washed up. Robins are crazy about water. They're always splashing around in it, and a lot of other species are too. So water is very important.
What about cleaning a bird bath? I think you and I were talking the other day. You said about once a week or every 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, a bird bath is gonna start to developing some algae in it and all that, and of course the birds that are in it using it are defecating in it and all that. So, I mean, I would dump it every day and put fresh water in it, and then about once a week clean it with some Clorox water solution. Kill all the bacteria in there, or Odoban, or one of those commercial ones that's out there that kills viruses and that sort of thing. Absolutely.
That's great. So besides a bird bath, and we have feeders or feeding stations, what else do we need to provide to keep birds coming to our yards?
Well,
and to keep them safe, I guess.
Yeah, this is my main feeding station, and you'll see the snag is on the left. You can see lined up with my garage. There's a snag there. That's what the pileated woodpecker was on. Below that is the feeder wheel down there on the left. Yeah, then you have some rhododendrons and other feeders, the peanut feeders hanging there. I have a table feeder, the bird doe feeders there. They're all there. And I have 4 of these at the house, actually, but this was the biggest one, and it's my favorite. And to the right is the water feature. But what I'm trying to show in this photo is, you see there's an American holly there, there's some Norway spruce, there's some rhododendron, there's some azaleas and some other things. There's shrubbery around there. It's kind of busy with shrubs and all that, but that's what the birds want. Birds need both approach and escape cover. They want to hop through there before they get to the last step where they take to the feeder. They want to be safe. They don't want to be out in the open because of predatory birds and all that. And the same thing when they take that seed out, like the chickadee and a titmouse does, they want to be able to fly quickly into some cover and break that seed apart and get at the heart of it. So if you haven't planted any kind of conifers, if your feeding station is just hanging on an old wash pole or a shepherd's hook that you put out in the middle of your yard, do the birds a favor and take 6 small spruce and plant them out around there. And if they get too big, cut them down for Christmas trees, but you'll always have some kind of cover. This is the feeding station out front of them. And there's 6 feeders in this picture, but you can only really see 1 because they're in cover. And that conifer on the right, which is a Japanese pine, it just happens to be. Underneath that, I throw a handful of millet, a big handful, probably a pound every day. And the birds just love being underneath there. That's what they want to do. They want to be under cover and feeding off the ground. I'm talking about sparrows now, but still. So yeah, cover for your feeders is as important as some of the foods you feed. Absolutely.
Is there any time of year when we should not be feeding or providing food for the birds?
I would never say that yeah, there's no time that you should not be feeding, because if you feed and the birds don't have to use it. So if they're not going to use it, they're not going to use it. But I feed sunflower seed year round, and there's always birds, titmice and chickadees and nuthatches. They can't resist. They're always coming to that feeder. In fact, they're feeding their young soft-bodied insects, because that's what most birds do. They catch insects and feed the soft-bodied protinaceous insects to their young for fast growth and all that. But they'll come to the feeding station and supplement their feed. It's like going up to your mailbox for every little bite that every time you want to get a bite in your children's mouth, you have to go up to the mailbox outside your street and go get it, like they have to for an insect. You take a break, they take a break. They come to the feeding station. So no, you can, but you shouldn't stop feeding. The point I'm really trying to make is you really shouldn't stop feeding until at least early May. May 1st is an okay cutoff, early May, when the insects are starting to flit about and all that, because up until that time, you have migrants coming into your yard and you have birds leaving your yard, but they're all looking for the last remnants of the food we provide. So it's pretty important to keep feeding.
So there is a cycle here, though. We put food out.
Yeah.
The smaller birds come, but then we're also going to see some predatory birds that are going to show up. So,
we are going to see some predatory birds. I have this is probably a sharp-shinned hawk, probably a female. She's pretty large there. Looks like a Sharpie from here, but that's on my feeder tree. So, hey, you're feeding birds. On any one day, I can have 160 individuals around my house and feeding. Like this winter when we had that 14 inches of snow, I could, the most I could count was 160 individual birds. If I was a hawk, I'd be there too. That's just feeding at level 2. That's level 2 feeding. And I can root for what the bird takes and hope it doesn't kill something that I really like, but it doesn't, that's beyond my power. So if you don't want that going on, well, then you can't feed birds at all. Nighttime predators come in. Screech owls snatch a woodpecker right off the roost or whatever, but mostly they're coming in because I'm attracting mice into the feeding station, because there's seed all over the ground. And if I go out there at night, I can see voles and mice moving around, and well, this screech is taking advantage of it. So another advantage of having a feeding station is your nighttime visitors.
And during the day, you're also feeding squirrels, correct?
Oh yeah, we're all feeding squirrels, and I feed so many squirrels. I even have albino squirrels that come to my feeder. So that's why everybody's seen a regular gray squirrel. So I have this photo. He's eating peanuts, hanging off there like an acrobat. It's something you got to put up. There's plenty of feeders out there that say squirrel proof and all that, but one thing they're not proof of, they're not bear proof, but they can be squirrel proof.
So we're putting food out. Other animals are coming, and we hear a lot of people in central Pennsylvania talk about how they end up getting black bears coming to their feeders.
Yeah.
So
there's not much you can do about that unless they're going to take their feeders all in. Well, I have 20 feeders. I'm not taking 20 feeders in. I call this slide the chow line, because, and the mama is over there. Actually, she's over feeding off the feeder wheel at this moment when she was letting me take these photos of her cubs, the twin cubs here. But every one of those feeders in that picture have been recovered from the woods, taken down, redone, had pieces put on it. I got more duct tape on feeders. I mean, you just have to deal with it or bring your feeders in at night, So bears are starting to be contented with. This winter was nice. They hibernated and stayed hibernated the entire winter. I didn't have one visitation, knock on wood, because I know it's going to happen. Any one of these nights coming, it's going to happen. And that white feeder is my indicator feeder. When that thing's on the ground, I know I got a visit from the bears.
Oh, that's great. Well, I'm going to let our listeners know that if you have a question, please make sure to put it in the question and answer box. We'll get to those in just a minute. We just have about 2 more questions for Scott. An important question is, what birds are leaving now that spring is coming, and where are they going?
Okay, well, this is a great slide that you put together here, and the junco, the slate-colored junco, dark-eyed junco, slate-colored version here in Pennsylvania, is probably everybody calls them, my grandparents call them snowbirds, and some people still call them snowbirds because they seem like they come with the snow. They're going to be leaving if they haven't already. I might have 6 out there when I had over 100, weeks ago. They're starting to move out. The pine siskin and northern finch is moving out most likely in the next week or 2. And even our cardinal, which is a grosbeak and is a finch. I might have 12 cardinals here at my house. In another couple of weeks, as you hear them singing, and they are one of the first songsters this spring, they're going to start moving out into different territories, and you might go from 10 cardinals to 2. And it's nothing you did with the food. It's just the way they're starting to spread out and starting to territorialize. And so these guys are basically leaving, other than the cardinal is going to be a little more rarer, not rarer, but less common, I should say. And then we have some great, exciting birds coming. And another reason why you should keep feeding. I'll continue feeding sunflower seed. The tree sparrow is going to leave, and the chipping sparrow will arrive. It's just, and then the rose-breasted grosbeak, which is depicted here in a photo of a white oak. Looks like a white oak and its flower. It's the male flowers are hanging down there. They chow down on them, but they take sunflower seed. They love sunflower seed. Goldfinches, you've had them all winter, and they're gonna kind of be coming in the smaller groups, but they're changing color, and you get these beautiful yellow goldfinches that people just one of their favorites. And then the indigo bunting. If you keep feeding Niger, you will get indigo buntings sitting on that Niger feeder along with the American goldfinch, which is quite a view, quite something to see, that blue and that yellow on the same feeder. So these birds are coming through, and they need food. The food is gone. They're moving to their breeding grounds up north, and some of them are going to stay around. I mean, rose-breasted grosbeaks and indigo buntings do nest right here in central PA. But if you want close contact with these birds and photo opportunities, keep feeding, keep putting it out there.
So a lot of these songbirds, we're hearing them. What's the best way to be able to identify birds? Like what should we do to figure out who's in our yard?
Well, the list is endless now, but it used to be get yourself a bird guide, whether it's a Peterson guide or a Sibley guide or one of the other Audubon guide, one of the other popular guides out there, and a decent pair of binoculars. It's a lot more fun feeding birds if you know what you're feeding. And you'd be surprised. People think, oh, they're looking out there, those are all goldfinches out there. And then they look with binoculars and see that there's something different about some. Some are streakier with yellow in the wings, and they have to find out that they have pine siskins. So I encourage people to use a bird guide. And there are so many good birding apps from Audubon, from iBird Pro and iBird Plus, and to name a few that are very $10. Audubon is free if you join the Audubon Society, and it's a great app. All the bird songs are on there. You never really need to, I hate to say this because I'm a book person, but you don't really need a book bird guide anymore. You can have it all on your your smartphone if you want to.
Well, speaking of bird books, one of the questions we have from the audience said, have you ever heard of the Burgess Book of Birds by Thornton Burgess?
I have not. I have a library of bird books, and I took ornithology in college and stuff like that, but I do not know that book. No, I don't.
So that's one we can look for.
Yeah, I can. The Life of Birds by Welty is usually a textbook used in universities for ornithology. People want to really read about behavior and egg laying and things like that. But there's so many other things out there. I have the Encyclopedia of Birds and some of Arthur Cleveland Bent's early studies of bird stomachs and what they're feeding. There's just so much out there. People have been fascinated with birds for a very, very long time.
I have another question for you. We talked about squirrels. Do squirrels
Yes.
scare off the birds? So are squirrels going to prevent birds from coming to the feeders?
They are. There's a pecking order among birds, actually. If you go to the Cornell site, it'll tell you that a red-bellied woodpecker will chase off a downy, which will chase off a nuthatch, which will chase, like they through observations, and they ask people to send in this data so they can do it. And squirrel, when you have a mammal like that, when a squirrel jumps in on the feeder, he usually runs. Now he'll co-feed. I can have a squirrel on my feeding table with 2 cardinals and all, as long as they're out at the other end. But if it's just one spot to be had, the squirrel's going to run the other birds off. The birds off, absolutely. Which is another reason why I'm too crazy about too many of them. They're bullies. They can be bullies.
I love squirrels, but
I know everybody.
So another question is, how many feeders do you recommend per acre? Can there be too many feeders?
Per acre? Well, my yard's about, that wouldn't use an acre. I would just go by the okay, like my yard is an acre basically, but the feeders are in pretty close to my house because I want to keep them in close so that there's not too many window accidents and things like that. I have 20 feeders, counting some of the logs and that around my house, and that's pretty many. That's more than most people, but per acre thing is not really a good measurement. It's really like what what your landscaping and what your habitat can handle. You can put 100 feeders up if you want, and maybe you get one bird on each, but that'd be kind of ridiculous, So I tell you, just keep putting them up. Keep putting them up till they're not being used, and then stop.
Are we seeing the same birds coming back every day, or like how often would a bird be coming back to your feeder?
Oh, they don't. As soon as they, like chickadees and titmice, they go off and fly off and put that seed in their little foot and beat on the shell till it comes off and eat the seed, and they're right back to the feeder for another one. This goes on all day long. Now in the summer, they're going to their nest about 400 times an afternoon with insects for their clutch, their young birds. Plus they're still trying to eat food at my feeders and all that. But birds don't stop. I mean, they have a high metabolism and it's in one end out the other kind of thing. But they don't need all that, but you're providing it, so they're going to keep on coming. They don't know that cupboard's not going to go bare. If you follow me.
Is it okay to put bird feeders near bird houses?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Some birds might be bothered by that, but yeah, I have bird houses right next to some feeders, and so a chickadee is getting a seed out of a tube feeder, and then there's a bluebird nesting in that bluebird box right next to it. Doesn't matter. The bluebird's only after insects, and the chickadee doesn't mind that it's there or whatever. So they coexist that way, no problem.
And this is a good question for me. Is there a way to keep starlings out of your yard?
Other than a shotgun,
which we are not advocating at all.
Right. No, starlings are actually they're a trouble bird. They're not as big a problem as they're non-native and they are invasive kind of species, but they come into your yard. They'll take some suet. They're after insects. They'll land in your yard. They'll eat a lot of grubs out of your yard, actually Japanese beetle grubs. So they can be beneficial in your yard. And I don't mind them near as much as house sparrows or our native grackles, who can really ruin a feeding station.
Yes, I've had that experience. I'm going to take one more question for everybody else who we didn't get to your questions. Please know that we will be asking Scott those questions and sending you a response for that. So one question is specifically about feeding. Should I be concerned if my cardinals eat from my hanging feeders? Is there a reason for this, or should I change something if they should be eating from the ground?
That's an interesting question, because I've never, now if she's saying she hanging feeder, meaning hanging platform feeder, they will do that. They won't usually perch and eat out of a hole of a tube feeder, but a hanging feeder, no. I mean, the hanging table feeder that was in the one photo where you get evening grosbeaks at, cardinals are also grosbeaks also. I mean, maybe people don't realize the old name for cardinal is cardinal grosbeak. It's a grosbeak. No, hanging feeders are fine, but it's going to be an open table type. They won't come to a tube feeder. And no, don't encourage them to go to the ground, but that's where they like to be most of the time. That's all.
Well, and we've had multiple questions. Can you repeat one more time the basic type of seed that we should be focusing on?
Yes. Straight sunflower is number one. And then a bird mix that facilitates feeding the sparrows with heavy millet, like millet, 50% millet, and then some sunflower seed mixed with it. To be honest with you, here's what I do. I buy 50 pounds of millet, pure millet, a 50-pound bag, throw it in a bin, add about 10 pounds of sunflower seed, maybe some fine cracked corn if I have it, but for the most part, that's it. And then that's what I feed on the ground. I don't buy a mix. I mix it myself. So, but something heavy in millet, and stay away from Milo. Milo is about the size of a BB. It's actually another name for sorghum. And while it's used for pheasants and things like that, and scratch feeds and game farms and stuff, it's not relished by our songbirds. But the cheaper feeds will say Milo first. If it says Milo, M for Milo, M for money. You're wasting your money.
Yeah, nice. All right. Thank you, Scott, so much for this conversation. I have learned a lot. I'm going to be making some changes and some additions to my yard to get some of these birds to
Great.
come more frequently. I'm excited to start finding out who is in my yard, not just hearing them wake me up every morning, but find out who's out there. So that's fantastic. So for everybody else who asked a question that we didn't quite get to, please know that we will be responding via email. And we hope you will join us next week, or not next week. I'm so excited having fun today. I want to do it again next week, but we're going to have to wait until April. So in April, we're going to have a conversation about vernal pools in Pennsylvania and the plants and animals that need them with Ryan Reed, Natural Resource Program Specialist with DCNR Bureau of Forestry. So if you're interested in that, please sign up on our website at statemuseumpa.org. Thanks again, Scott.
You're quite welcome.
This was a great chat today. I learned a lot. I appreciate all your information.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. You too. Sherry?
Bye-bye.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Just want to let you know that I did put a couple of links in the chat box that gives you some ideas. Also, my email, ctrimble@pa.gov. It's where you got your links from before. That's a great place. If any of your questions didn't get answered, please make sure you do that. But thanks for joining us again, and everybody have a great weekend. Thank you.